The case we uncover today begins in a place no one would ever expect. It started with what seemed like nothing more than the renovation of an old, decaying public restroom, hidden within the housing complex of the County Livestock Bureau in Wuxuan County, Guizhou Province, China. It was September of 2014, and a man known as Lao Dian, a local farmer working as a temporary laborer, was diligently carrying out his task. That restroom had stood for more than 35 years, reeking with unbearable stench, long overdue for reconstruction to meet the new sanitary standards of Zunyi City. On the evening of September 10th, as his workday came to an end, Lao Dian pulled out an old woven sack from the bottom of the septic pit. Inside the sack was a pile of bones. But at that moment, Lao Dian assumed it was nothing unusual, just animal remains. After all, the area was dotted with slaughterhouses, and it was not uncommon for cattle or sheep bones to be discarded in such a way. Without giving it much thought, he set the bag aside and went home, exhausted after a long day of heavy labor. But the following morning, September 11th, at around 6 o'clock, as Lao Dian returned to the site and continued clearing away broken bricks, shattered tiles, and soil from the septic pit, he stumbled upon something that stopped him cold. Amidst the debris, a human skull emerged, intact, though aged by time. At once, Lao Dian's mind flashed back to the sack of bones he had unearthed the night before. A chill raced down his spine. He realized he had just uncovered a terrifying secret, a crime long buried beneath the ground. Without hesitation, he alerted the site supervisors. Police from Wuxuan County quickly arrived. The restroom stood in a secluded spot, tucked into the shared courtyard of the Livestock Bureau housing block, flanked by walls on 3 sides and by building number 5 on the 4th. From the street, it was barely visible. Footage from the scene shows the skull lying beside the septic tank, near the decaying woven sack and the bones Lao Dian had already unearthed. Forensic specialists and investigators began their painstaking work, carefully collecting every fragment of evidence. The bones and skull were immediately sent to the forensic lab for closer examination. At the scene, investigators combed through every corner, desperate to find more clues that might reveal the victim's identity and the story behind these remains. Among the items recovered were a faded shirt, a pair of trousers labeled FZ Jean, a pair of Western-style shorts, an old cloth bag, and an outdated Samsung cell phone. What stood out was not what they found, but what they did not. There were no knives, no guns, no blunt instruments, nothing that could be linked to a weapon. Only bones, clothing, the cloth bag, and the phone. With the evidence in hand, Wuxuan police reached an immediate conclusion. This was no accident. This was murder. The body had been deliberately dismembered, packed into a sack, and dumped into the septic pit. There was no way the victim could have fallen in by chance, nor could such a gruesome process have been self-inflicted. Now, before the investigators lay the undeniable truth. A deliberate homicide, concealed for years, was finally uncovered. But who was the victim? What caused their death? And how could evidence be pieced together when the remains had been reduced to bare bones, lying underground for so long? These were the haunting questions, the greatest challenges the investigative team faced from the very first moments. In an effort to identify the victim, forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the skull with the other bones found inside the woven sack. Yet, as the skeleton took shape, an image emerged that left everyone stunned. The figure stood no taller than 4 feet 7 inches, yet possessed extremely broad shoulders and a remarkably powerful build. So robust, in fact, that it dwarfed even the 6-foot-tall police captain overseeing the case. Who could this person possibly be? Could it be that in this small, quiet county of Wuxuan, someone with such an extraordinary physique had lived and vanished without anyone ever noticing? As forensic doctors examined the remains more closely, they uncovered chilling details. On the skull, a deep slash mark was found running across the bridge of the nose, and another cut was visible on the left temple. These wounds left no room for doubt, solid proof that this was indeed a murder. From the skull's characteristics, the experts also made a preliminary assessment. The victim was female, a woman with an unusual physique, her life violently ended by those fatal blows to the head. To obtain more accurate results, police from Wuxuan County sent the skull and bones to the Ministry of Public Security's Forensic Center. And there, an astonishing revelation emerged, one that finally explained the bizarre shape of the reconstructed body. The experts determined that the bones found in the woven sack were not human at all. They were cattle bones. What the local forensic team had pieced together was, in fact, a strange combination. A human skull mistakenly joined with animal remains. This also explained why cattle bones were found in the septic pit. After all, the site was close to the Livestock Bureau, a place where slaughterhouse waste might easily have been discarded. The official forensic report provided crucial information. The victim was identified as a woman, estimated to be between 26 and 29 years old, standing about 5 feet 3 to 5 feet 5 in height. What encouraged the forensic technicians most was that the victim's teeth were relatively intact. This allowed them not only to confirm age, height, and gender, but more importantly, to extract DNA, a vital key that could one day unlock her true identity. Yet another puzzle remained. The restroom where the body was discovered had been in use for more than 35 years. According to staff at the Livestock Bureau, it had been thoroughly cleaned once, about 13 years earlier in 2001. At that time, nothing unusual had been found. This meant the crime must have taken place after that year. Investigators narrowed the timeline to the early 2000s, focusing on cases after 2000. But searching for a missing woman from more than a decade ago was no easy task. Wuxuan County, a mountainous region in northern Guizhou province, had a registered population of around 450,000, and more than 100,000 migrants had come and gone over the past 15 years. When police combed through missing persons reports dating back to 2000, they found just over 40 cases involving women. None matched the description of the victim. Left with no choice, they expanded their search, visiting village after village, household by household, compiling lists of every woman who had gone away for work or who had mysteriously fallen out of contact for years. A public reward of 10,000 yuan was even offered for any useful information that could help identify the victim. While one team of officers focused on tracing her identity, another turned their attention to the evidence recovered at the scene: the faded shirt, the trousers, the old cloth bag, and the battered cell phone. Could these items have belonged to the victim or to her killer? And could they lead to the answers police so desperately needed? Investigators first pursued the cloth bag, printed with the words, "My Family." They discovered it had been distributed by a major telecommunications company as a promotional gift to thousands of customers who signed up for internet or phone service. But most of those customers had incomplete or outdated registration details, leaving the bag a dead end. The clothing offered little more. The brands were popular in Wuxuan more than a decade earlier, sold by the thousands, impossible to trace back to a single owner. Piece by piece, both the bag and the clothes faded into silence, their stories lost. That left one final hope: the Samsung E838 cell phone. Released in late 2004 and widely sold in Wuxuan County around 2005 and 2006, it had lain in the septic pit for years, waterlogged and badly damaged. Even the SIM card was destroyed. After painstaking technical work, investigators managed to recover the phone number and trace its past users. To their surprise, 3 different men had owned it: Li and Wang, both judicial employees, and Zhang, a businessman. None of them were living in Wuxuan County by the time the case was discovered. Could one of them have vanished from town after committing murder? Police quietly investigated Li and Wang. Both men were found to be upright, law-abiding officials. Their transfers to other jurisdictions followed proper procedures, with nothing suspicious in their records. As for Zhang, the businessman, he too had no criminal background and no signs of foul play. Once again, the trail went cold. Every piece of evidence collected at the scene failed to connect the investigators to either a suspect or a name for the victim. In the midst of this deadlock, Chief Investigator Zhang Huai and his mentor, Zi Min, returned to the scene again and again. They noted that the restroom was hidden away, not accessible from the main road, but through narrow lanes between the housing blocks. Whoever had dumped the body must have been a local, someone deeply familiar with the area. The chances of an outsider slipping into the very heart of the city to dispose of a corpse here seemed almost impossible. With this new line of reasoning, police narrowed their focus. They began looking closely at the residents who lived in and around the Livestock Bureau's housing complex. 2 men soon came under suspicion. The first was Liang, in his 40s, a divorced addict living directly across from the public restroom. Known for bringing home different women over the years, he had carried on this lifestyle for more than a decade. Could Liang have fallen into conflict with one of these women, killed her, and hidden her body in the restroom pit? He quickly became a prime suspect. The second was a man living in building number 5, who had once served a 2-year prison sentence for gambling back in 2005. DNA samples were taken from both men, as investigators searched for the truth buried beneath years of silence. By this point, police had compiled files on 5 individuals tied to the case, 3 past owners of the cell phone, and 2 men living near the scene. Yet the connection between any of them and the victim remained frustratingly unclear. More than a month had passed since the discovery of the skull, when at last the Special Task Force reviewing missing persons made a breakthrough. Among the reports, they identified several missing women whose age and height matched the forensic findings. 3 cases stood out: a Yuan, Zhang Yan, and A Fen. A Yuan was a woman from northern China who had married into Wuxuan. She suffered from mental illness and had vanished about 8 years earlier at the age of 30. Zhang Yan had disappeared more than 15 years ago, at only 18, after leaving home to work in another province. Her family never heard from her again. And then there was a Fen. She had been healthy, without any history of mental illness, and disappeared at around 27 years old. All 3 had gone missing more than a decade earlier, and each one fit the forensic profile almost perfectly. To determine the victim's identity once and for all, police collected DNA samples from the relatives of all 3 women, comparing them to DNA extracted from the victim's teeth. At the same time, the skull was sent to the prestigious Institute 213 in Tianjin, northeastern China, an institute world-renowned for its craniofacial reconstruction techniques, developed in the 1980s and adopted worldwide. Scientists at Institute 213 photographed the skull from multiple angles and compared it with photos of the missing women. If more than 27 anatomical points matched, the brow ridge, the nasal bridge, the philtrum, they could confirm an identification. And then the results came in. The conclusion was clear. The skull belonged to a Fen. Almost simultaneously, the Ministry of Public Security's DNA comparison returned the same answer. The victim was Liu Defen, known to those around her simply as A Fen. For investigators, it was a turning point. The veil of anonymity was lifted, a breakthrough that brought a wave of relief to the entire team. At last, they had a name. Now they could shift their focus. Who was a Fen, and who had wanted her dead? It turned out a Fen was no ordinary woman. In the small world of Wuxuan County, she was widely known, nicknamed the Big Sister of the Tam Kwai Jia Ba. The nickname reflected her bold, fearless personality. She was blunt, strong-willed, always standing up for others, never one to accept being wronged. Many said she carried herself more like a man than a woman, tougher, even, than many men themselves. Who could possibly have had the power or the courage to kill such a formidable woman? Identifying her brought hope, but it also opened a new web of complexity. Her personal life was anything but simple. Before the age of 20, she had married and given birth to a son in Chuzhou, Jiangsu province. But when the boy was around 3, she abandoned her husband and child, returning to her native Guizhou. There she became known for defending the weak and was involved with several men. Among them was Liu Tai-ming, and, according to whispers, a third person named Xiao Ye had once intruded on their relationship. For detectives, This tangled past raised a daunting question. Could they untangle the threads of her relationships and uncover the one who ended her life? The first suspect considered was her husband in Suzhou. Could he have harbored deep resentment after being left alone with their child, without so much as a letter or money sent from her? Could he have tracked her to Wuxuan to exact revenge? But this possibility was soon dismissed. The place where her body was hidden, the old public restroom in a secluded housing complex, was a spot only locals would know. An outsider was unlikely to stumble across such a location. The next suspect was Xiao Ye, the former girlfriend of Tai Ming, and the third woman in the stormy relationship. A Fen had once publicly assaulted her in the street. Could Xiao Ye have taken revenge? Again, the theory fell apart. Xiao Ye was not a local, unfamiliar with the area, and physically weak, hardly capable of overpowering someone like a Fen. All evidence pointed back to one man, Liu Tai Ming, a Fen's boyfriend. Tai Ming was a native of Wuxuan County, 1 year older than a Fen. His father had been a bank official in town, and his family owned an apartment in the banking staff housing complex. From childhood, Tai Ming knew every corner of the city, including the livestock bureau housing area where the body was found. His apartment was just a short walk from the old restroom. When he lived with A Fen, the two stayed in his father's apartment. Neighbors often complained about their constant fights, loud arguments echoing through the night. The turmoil went on until late 2002, when Tai Ming suddenly returned A Fen's belongings to her mother, claiming that the two of them were leaving town to earn money for their wedding. But A Fen was not with him. Her mother wasn't overly suspicious. After all, her daughter was known for storming out for days at a time after quarrels. But this time, she never returned. From that moment on, A Fen was gone, and Tai Ming was the last person known to have seen her alive. To investigators, the conclusion was unavoidable. Tai Ming was their prime suspect. When they tried to find him, they discovered that his father had long since passed away. His mother was raising 2 young granddaughters alone, and Tai Ming himself was away working as a cook on a ship in Suzhou, Jiangsu. A team of detectives was dispatched immediately to track him. Yet there was still a problem. Without solid evidence, an arrest could collapse if Tai Ming simply denied everything. The investigators needed proof, so they took a risk. They carried out a secret search of his former apartment, the one he had shared with A Fen. They waited until his nieces left for school, then quietly slipped inside. Their goal was simple: to find any trace of blood, any mark that could prove the apartment had once been a crime scene, and then their patience paid off. In the bedroom, on the tiled floor, faint stains emerged under forensic light. Blood. Though wiped away long ago, though faded with time, the traces were still there. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. A warrant was issued immediately. In Jiangsu, police closed in and arrested Tai Ming. From that moment forward, the role of Tai Ming, as the killer of A Fen, was all but sealed. When Tai Ming was first arrested, he fell into silence. He insisted he remembered nothing, that he knew nothing about the case. He even begged the police for protection, swearing he was innocent. But as investigators laid out the mountain of evidence, the testimony of witnesses, the undeniable traces of blood found in his own home, his story began to crack. His silence gave way to shifting lies. At first, he claimed A Fen had indeed died in his apartment, but he was not the killer. Instead, he blamed his own father. According to him, his father disapproved of their relationship. When A Fen refused to leave, his father became furious and killed her. It sounded like a convenient explanation, especially since his father had already passed away and could no longer defend himself. But investigators quickly dismantled this story. At the time of A Fen's death, his father was a frail retiree in his 60s, hardly capable of overpowering a woman as strong and fiery as A Fen. Under relentless questioning and confronted with unshakable evidence, Tai Ming finally broke. He confessed. He had killed A Fen with his own hands. He even led police back to the scene of his cover-up, an old cement pit just 15 meters from the public restroom. Once used to store pig feed, it had long been abandoned and filled with trash. The stench of rotting garbage had masked the smell of her body for years. There, Tai Ming admitted everything. He described how he had once been captivated by Fen's unusual looks and bold character. He was 27 when they met. She was 26. At first, he was drawn to her, but over time, their relationship soured. He discovered she had a child from a previous marriage in Jiangsu. The tension grew unbearable. Their love turned violent. They quarreled constantly, even split once. He replaced the locks on his apartment and began dating a new girlfriend, Xiao Ye. But Fen stormed back, attacking Xiao Ye in broad daylight. Tai Ming warned her to stop, terrified she would strike again, but she never listened. Her obsession deepened. She forced her way back into his apartment, even slashing his clothes and belongings with a knife in fits of rage. Tai Ming felt trapped, powerless to escape her grip. And then came the fateful day. One morning, his father mentioned seeing Fen leave the apartment with another man. Suspicion consumed him. That night, after his father left for the countryside, Tai Ming returned home near midnight. He confronted her. She denied everything, furious at his accusations. The argument exploded. Fen, fiery and unyielding, grabbed a fruit knife and slashed at him, cutting his arms and leaving scars that would later betray him under police questioning. In a blind rage, Tai Ming snapped. He lunged into the kitchen, seized a large cooking knife, and struck her down. Afterward, he wrapped her body in a bedsheet she had brought from her mother's home, the very sheet her family later realized was missing. He carried her to the cement pit and buried her beneath heaps of trash. For months, the reeking garbage concealed the crime, but paranoia gnawed at him. Afraid of discovery, he later returned to the pit. By then, decomposition had taken its toll. He retrieved only the skull and tossed it into the septic tank of the public restroom nearby. After the crime, Tai Ming fled Wuxuan. He wandered from Tibet to Chongqing, then to Shanghai, before finally settling in Suzhou, Jiangsu, where he was captured years later. He admitted that from the night of the killing, he never knew peace. He lived in constant fear, always on the move, unable to settle. Even after marrying and fathering children, the shadow of his crime haunted him. He said he had learned how to love, how to care for his family, but the ghost of Fen never left him. Tai Ming was born into privilege. His father was a bank officer. He grew up in the city, knowing every hidden corner of Wuxuan. That familiarity had allowed him to hide her body so well. His relationship with Fen had been reckless from the start, built on attraction without understanding. When her fiery temper, her violence, and his own impulsiveness collided, tragedy became inevitable. By June 2015, the People's Court of Zunyi City delivered its final judgment. Tai Ming was sentenced to life imprisonment for intentional homicide and ordered to pay more than 60,000 yuan in civil compensation to Fen's family. He accepted the sentence without appeal. The rest of his life would be spent behind bars, paying for the crime he once thought he could bury forever. But justice, even when it comes, cannot erase pain. The family he built while on the run fell apart. His wife and children were left to face an uncertain, difficult future. And for Fen's family, the wound never healed. Her mother still clings to faded photographs, remembering the daughter she lost. Her father, until his dying breath, never stopped asking where she had gone, never knowing she had been murdered and discarded so cruelly. The case of Wuxuan County stands as more than a tale of cold-blooded murder. It is proof of the persistence of investigators who, from a bag of bones and faint bloodstains, uncovered a hidden truth. In the end, Tai Ming was punished. But the scars of his crime, the grief of a family, the mark upon a community, will never truly fade. Justice may come late, but it comes, and it shines a light on the darkest of secrets.